All right, welcome to Alphabet Scoop number 11. This is our 11th episode. Thanks again. Well, thanks in the first place for tuning in and for joining us today. We have a lot of news. I'm your host, Stephen Hall, and I'm being joined today once again by our Abner Lee. How are you, man?
Hi.
So today we've got a lot of news. We're going to talk about just lots of stuff that's been happening in the Google and the Alphabet worlds this week. First up, we have Pixel 2 and Pixel 3, which I guess we can start talking about that supposed. Well, I wouldn't even say supposed. The not leak, the absolutely not a leak that's been making the rounds this week. Basically, long story short, there's a site called Slash Leaks, I think. It's just a site where a bunch of contributors just post things they think might be leaks or are leaks, and it basically lets you rank people. We've had hit or miss experience with using that site as a source, but basically, someone posted this screenshot of the Android P Developer Preview 2 gesture settings menu, which I have to say has been publicly visible in the settings app of Android P Developer Preview 2 since the day of I/O, since Google pushed it public. And someone posted it on there saying, "Oh, is this the Pixel 3?" And from there, it just lit a little bit of a fire, I guess, across all the Android blogs, and dozens of them posted basically with the same headline. It's easy page views because we're all Google I/O is behind us, and we're all ready for the Google hardware event later this year. So I think people are clamoring for a Pixel 3 leak, but it obviously isn't one. I think if anyone's watching this show, if you're watching the show, you probably already knew that. So I don't really have to tell you that. But it was basically just a generic image of a bezel-less
rectangle. Yeah,
it was a rectangle.
It's a shape. Let's start with that. Basics.
Yeah, it's a shape, and it looked like it has a screen. But as I mentioned it in the post we did, I think it's pretty obvious that this was intended to just be just a generic phone. But people did use the last year's leak of the design of the Pixel 2 XL in the data transfer tool app as evidence that this might be real, right?
Mm-hmm. But that was, if I recall correctly, that was weeks away from the event, not months like we are now.
Yeah, that was like 4 weeks before the event, I think. And yeah, we're 6 months away. And the other interesting thing about that was that, so for those that aren't in the loop, so data transfer tool is an app that Google pushed for the Pixel 2 XL or the Pixel 2 that lets you transfer data from another phone. And it had this glyph or like this image of the Pixel 2 XL next to like an iPhone silhouette or whatever. And the app popped up on the Play Store. People got their hands on it, and it obviously looked like an unreleased Pixel phone, and it did. It looked like what ended up being the Pixel 2 XL. But after that got out, Google
pulled it
very quickly, like pulled it immediately. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that contrasts a lot with what we're seeing with this image, supposed leak, in that this was intentional. Like, this was not like a whoops, we accidentally included a picture of a phone that's not being announced for 6 months. It was we intentionally are including like a little image, a generic image. And there's no way that this was an accident. And so I guess we can't rule out the possibility that it is Google intentionally just messing with us. Mm-hmm. Although that seems unlikely.
That, though. Remember Pixel Ultra? Remember that at the event?
Oh yeah, that's right. So that was another thing. Pixel Ultra or Pixel 2 Ultra or whatever. It was some sketchy leak from like a few weeks before the event last year or something, and it was making the rounds, and it was obviously not a leak. It was just it was a very well orchestrated fake, I think. The guy who made it was a YouTuber or something, a designer. So it was pretty well orchestrated. I think without analyzing it closely, it was pretty believable. But yeah, as Abner's saying, it was Google mentioned it during their event last year. So, you know, they do like to play some games, I guess. Uh, but yeah, it would be funny if the event comes around later this year and the Pixel 3 looks exactly like that rectangle. That would be really funny.
That would be impressive, actually, because there was basically no borders in that.
Right. Yeah, we've never really
That's a
seen.
dream. It's like the idealized form of the pixel, like which
Right.
everybody wants at the end of the day.
Right. So like before the notch became a thing, there were lots of phones that kind of did this, like barely, it's like almost no bezel, but there was like a chin at the bottom, right?
Yep.
Like the Mi Mix comes to mind. It might have been the first one, like the original Mi Mix. Um, and but then like obviously these manufacturers are now moving toward going with an even smaller chin or even the same size chin in some cases, and just using a notch at the top for the camera. So like the original Mi Mix put the camera at the bottom, right? And
Yes, I
that
believe so.
and I think it did, and that made like it made taking like photos like selfies or whatever like really hard because the angles were just like not normal, or something like that. But yeah, so now manufacturers are going with notches, obviously. Um, and so it would be interesting. It would be impressive if Google pulled off a phone with like absolutely no bezels, because you know there's some things that you just absolutely have to have a bezel for,
Yeah,
or at
it's a
least a
math of
notch. You
physics.
know, it's a matter of physics having room for a speaker and a front facing camera and stuff. So it's pretty. I don't know, like can you would it be possible to get that front facing sensor small enough and get all of that hardware that needs to be I don't if it were possible to do that, Apple would have done it already, right, with the
Yeah,
iPhone 10.
I
Like
feel like yeah.
the whole point of the iPhone 10, the only reason it has a notch is because Apple couldn't pull it off. um, and no offense to Google, but I would say Apple's hardware chops
Oh
are
yeah, Google's not there yet. I don't know if LG or Samsung would be the people responsible for that at this stage, and I don't think they're simply there yet. So still a long roads to go before that idealized just a screen phone.
Yeah, I think I saw a tweet MKBHD pushed out this week, I think, saying or showing like the natural progression of maybe like the notch disappearing over the next few years of like, you know, it's like the size it is now, maybe in a couple years it'll be half that size. A couple years later it'll be like just the little spots needed for the camera and the speaker or whatever other sensors. And then
It's
the year
under the
after that would be
display.
gone completely and under the display or something somehow. So yeah, at this point it's a matter of physics, and I think only using the physics argument you could say that this is not the Pixel 3, right?
Yeah, just from like
So
reasonable
yeah,
pragmatism.
right. So besides the obvious reasons that it's not, it seems obvious. So anyways, next up I did my I kind of in a related on a related note, I did my review of the Google Pixel 2 XL this week. Um, and it was so like I'd actually been working on this for about 6 months. I was originally going to do like a bigger, like longer form review just a few weeks after our like initial one because uh
All the drama.
yeah,
It's so
and on top of that, I feel like phone reviews in general are just like everyone pushes and hits that embargo date, and so all the phone reviews kind of come out the same, and no one's really taking the time to really think for themselves. You feel that way?
yeah, definitely because like this like I as perfectly showcased by the Pixel 2 XL screen fiasco, some things just take time to surface to for people to notice, for like hundreds of people, for thousands of regular people to start notice. That's just like that's unavoidable. And this model of like doing what we did was an initial review, and that gave the uh, well, in essence, first impressions. And 6 months later, we're ready with a definitive piece, which
Yeah.
works.
So I mean, long story short, I had a conversation with someone at IFA 2016. I don't remember who it was, but I was having this conversation with them about phones just in general and just like the rat race basically. And we kind of talked about how those of us that are kind of in the loop or in the tech circles are don't really see it, but a lot of people just want a phone. Like they want their phone. Like they don't really care. Like I think that's obvious. Like we all have parents or siblings that just don't care about technology. They just want the latest iPhone. But I think like the reason so many people like the iPhone is that it's not iPhone to them. It's not it's not anything about the iPhone that they particularly love. It's the familiarity. One for one thing, if they've been using one for 5 years, and that familiarity over time turns iPhone as we compare. Oh, let's do a video like comparing Pixel 2 XL versus iPhone 10, and we compare features side by side, and we try to make arguments one way or another for which one we should buy. But I think a lot of people, their iPhone is just phone. Like it's just um, it's just that tool that they need, and they don't care about what software it runs, whether it gets software updates. They care about a few things, obviously. I mean, I think that's something that Google is absolutely nailing. One of the
Yes.
things that a lot of people really, really care about with their phones
Is
is
the
the camera.
camera.
Like that's the thing that everyone cares about. Your mom, your grandma, your sister, your brother, they all care about the camera. And in contrast to the Nexus phones, that is something that Google has absolutely nailed.
Yeah. Okay, one thing, Nexus, that's like what is it? Blade Runner reference. So that was setting the stage very early for who Google's ideal product is. But for the Pixel, that everybody knows what a Pixel is. That is a very common consumer term. So camera, so that's like Google Camera, if you will, and people flock to that fact so much. Like you brought up the point that for most people, phones are commodities. They're who cares as long as it works, as long as you have apps, the internet, and but Google still, to all those things that people desire, they found the most common things, which you highlighted as the camera, and two, I think is would be like the Google Photos unlimited upload, the services aspect of
Oh
it.
yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
a like again like 2 years in, Google hit some. They really hit it on the head. They made a use case for the Pixel phone existing beyond they how they might explain it could be that we need a phone to represent the best of Android, but from the consumer standpoint, they just made a really good phone that's on par with the iPhone, if not excels it in terms of
Right.
it's just a phone simplicity, hitting it on the
Yeah, I
head.
think the best way to, kind of visualize this is just think about the way Apple advertises their phones versus the way Samsung advertises their phones. And you'll see Apple with their emotional appeals and their phones or their ads, with the exception of the iPhone 10. The original iPhone 10 ad was very hard on features, and it basically did bullet points like Face ID, AR stuff. Like it was like boom, 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 all this stuff that it comes with. But generally speaking, especially in the last few years of phones when the iPhone was not changing that much, although on the inside, obviously it was getting tons of spec bumps and stuff like that. Their ads have all been emotional appeals. It's always about a family or a kid or, something about like life, like, your phone can improve your life in this way, or, they'll throw in like hints of romance or whatever. Like it's a very like human thing, right? And
Mhm.
Samsung's ads are always like, like bragging about their features and how the features are better than the iPhone, or they'll focus on a specific spec or like a specific feature, like a stylus or whatever, and they'll make a whole ad about how the Note 8 has a stylus or whatever. And I think that like that just shows you the two markets that they're marketing to, that they're aiming for, and that's basically, I mean, Samsung dominates Android. Like they're the Android maker, and they're the only real competitor to Apple. I mean, we talk about all these phones. It's fascinating to me. The Android blogs and even us, we talk about all these phones, but ultimately, so many of these phones, even LG now. LG used to be kind of a key player, but even LG now, HTC, Sony, like OnePlus, like all these companies we talk about all the time, they have tiny, tiny percentages of market share. I'm talking about the United States,
Mhm.
obviously. But in the United States, these companies have such tiny market share. Um, And so what I wanted to point, coming back to the Pixel, what I wanted to point out in my Pixel 2 review is that this was true of the first Pixel, but I think with the Pixel 2 XL, Google has really solidified that what they're trying to do is not be another Android OEM. And that's what they kind of were with the Nexus phones. You know, like they weren't really, they weren't even like comparable to LG or HTC or the other, you know, bigger names that aren't Samsung. But Google's making it very obvious, and I think succeeding at saying, we're going to do something that even Samsung's not doing. Well, debatably isn't doing as much as they should, which is really go after those people who are more compelled to buy a phone because of the emotional appeals and less compelled to buy a phone because of a specific feature. And that's unique. I think that's really unique. And the Pixel 2 XL and using it all year or the last 7 months has really proven to me that I can use this phone the same way that anyone can use an iPhone. It's reliable. It doesn't have any weird UI stuff that just annoys me. Like that's one thing that like I hear my mom talk about all the time. This XYZ on this Android phone she has annoys her. Like this annoys me. You know, whether it be the glitchiness of a settings menu or whatever, or the camera not opening fast enough, or you know, all these things. Like that's the thing that people care about. Like people get annoyed with those kinds of things. And long story short, on my Pixel 2 review or Pixel 2 XL review is that Google established this last year, but they're even further establishing it this year, that they're building a phone for the every person. And I think that it's kind of, I'm excited and hopeful to see the sales numbers catch up with the awesome phone that they're making. You've been using a Pixel 2, right? Like
Yeah,
most of the...
yeah. For a few months when it first came out, I actually stuck to the original Pixel, but for me, I went with the smaller Pixel 2 because size preferences, and of course, I'm not that audience that you're just talking about, of wanting something that just works. So that aside, but from like a more, I guess, from the more advanced perspective, the Pixel 2, as much as I love the design of the original Pixel, I ended up finding that the Pixel 2 has the features, what changed is really good. So for me, my favorite change is the ambient display, the always-on display. So that is a bit of a game changer in terms of, like, for me, how I manage notifications. That is like
Right.
a real
Yeah.
tangible impact. And this is like the one area that Android has an advantage over, has for a good 2-3 years, is something that the iPhone doesn't have. And again, like Samsung has led the pack with these so many features, so many, like, it's overwhelming what you can do with their always on display. And Google is just starting to build new features into the P. But I think like the slower, deliberate approach Google's taking with something as simple as always on displays could have a noticeable effect for users in terms of like how valuable it is, that they're not
Mhm.
overloading it with, like, they're not just replicating the entire notification tray on the lock screen. So I think that's a plus.
Yeah, I on the note of the always on display, one of the things that I just love about the Pixel 2 XL, and I didn't mention this in my review, I should have, but the glanceability of those app icons that I have notifications for,
Mhm.
it's like so useful. You know, being able to see, so like on my phone right now, I've got uh, let's see what they are. So I have a notification telling me I just signed in from a new device, which that's happening all the time. I just signed in for the first time on the LG G7 Thin Q with that specific account. And then I have a little icon for Slack, a little icon for Twitter, a little icon for Nest. And so that's just like really useful. I love being able to see just like at a glance that I have like a Twitter notification, for instance, because what that for me lets me do is it lets me choose to ignore it. You know,
Yeah,
on an
that's a
iPhone,
very good point.
like on an iPhone, you have to scroll through. You can't really just ignore at a glance because you have to like do a little bit of digging to like see what it is that your phone's telling you about. But I can see on my Pixel 2 XL that I've got 5 notifications from 5 different apps. Even if I don't know exactly what those notifications are, I can still choose to ignore it because I know that that tweet notification, that's probably just someone liking that tweet from an hour ago. I don't need to check
Mhm.
that. And so I don't even have to turn the screen on. I just see that, I don't need that right now. And that I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So,
How about the design of the Pixel 2 XL compared to the original?
yeah, we've talked about this on the podcast before, I think. If I had to pick, okay, well, let's just put it this way. So if I had to go with the smaller Pixel 2 versus the smaller Pixel every day of the week.
Mhm.
Um,
The small original Pixel, yeah.
yeah, right, the smaller original Pixel. But when you compare the Pixel 2 XL versus the Pixel XL,
No
I
contest.
I have to pick the Pixel 2 XL. Even though I like the smaller, or I like the Pixel XL a lot, and I would pick the Pixel XL over the smaller Pixel 2 any day of the week even. And I have so many praises for some of the like the little things that like that Google did, like the wedge. We talk about it all the time. I'm obsessed with the wedge. I mean, I could talk about it on every single podcast because that's one of those things that I'm like, Google has like really thoughtful hardware design. That's so exciting. Because like I feel like that's so rare with some Android OEMs now because everyone's just, you know, putting their own brand on a generic phone from whatever. So but with the Pixel 2 XL, the smaller bezels, I have to pick that. I just it's so much better.
Yeah.
The dual front facing speakers have to do that. I like the rounded corners a lot. That's just like an aesthetic thing, or like it's just a preference.
Mhm.
I like that a lot, and yeah, there's the downside of the camera bump sticking out
Yeah,
because there's
I
no
didn't
wedge
notice it.
anymore.
I didn't notice it.
Hashtag
Interesting.
bring back the wedge 2018. Like Pixel 3 needs to have a wedge. Come on, Google.
Could be the
Uh,
iconic thing. Really could be.
yeah, who knows? But yeah, I think that the Pixel 2 XL wins. It like I said in my review, it's a betrayal in the sense that like I think Google's design to or overall approach to designing its latest phones with Pixel 2 and 2 XL was a downgrade versus how I thought was like a very like thoughtful approach with the first two. But
Mhm.
just comparing the Pixel 2 XL versus the Pixel XL side by side and just forgetting everything else and forgetting how, in my opinion, crappy the small Pixel 2 is. I like the size, but everything else about it is a downgrade, in my opinion. Um, if I just put the Pixel XL and Pixel 2 XL beside each other, the Pixel 2 XL wins. What about you? What do you think?
Actually, I want to talk about the coating, about that plastic feeling coating on the Pixel 2s. I think in terms of like what's this year's wedge equivalent and like Google's thoughtful design decision, I think it's a decision to coat the metal with a coating with a
Mm-hmm.
plastic like coating. Year later, I still can't get used to it. It feels cheaper. Like it has the properties of metal, in which if it's when you're picking it up from a cold room, it feels cold like metal should. But at the same time, it makes it feel a bit cheaper. Like there's no premium metallic feeling to it, and that's like the thing where I think Google veered away in terms of like good design there. Like I get why they did it, but I don't personally
Yeah,
like
it's
it.
the one thing is so which pixels you have a regular Pixel 2, right?
Yeah.
Which one do you have? Do you have the white one or the black one?
Oh, the black one.
Okay, that's interesting. Cause like I felt like maybe it's just me, but I felt like so I have the smaller white Pixel 2. I
Uh,
feel like the coating feels very different on the black XL versus the white Pixel 2. And
oh,
it might be a Pixel 2 versus XL thing, or it might be a white versus black thing. I'm not sure. Maybe you have a thought on that? Or
I feel like who is it? They've definitely Google's definitely done different coatings. the Nexus 5, I believe. Like the red Nexus 5 compared to the black one, compared to the white one. It definitely felt different. So
Right.
I think that would make sense about why. But
Well,
yeah,
whatever the case may be,
whatever the
I
case may be.
find the black Pixel 2 XL, I just it doesn't feel cheap as much as, so like the white Pixel 2 feels plasticky. Like I would almost not be able to tell that it's metal at all.
Mm.
Um, Whereas to me, the XL's black coating, and again, I don't know if there's an XL thing or a like white versus black thing, but it feels very premium and matte to me. And even the scratches. So I've got, you can see the images in my review. I've got some scratches on the back, and it almost looks like it's metal, in my opinion. And it feels like I like it. It's like a matte black finish. It's kind of stealthy to me. Um, and I don't get that feeling of cheapness as I do as much on the white Pixel 2. Maybe one of the people who are watching this can comment and let us know what might be going on there, or what they think. But yeah, that's my take on that. Um, yeah, I mean, but to me, again,
It's
the big
just one
win.
aspect. Yeah, the big
Yeah, that's
win,
one
big
aspect.
picture.
As a whole, the Pixel 2 XL is like I can't I keep coming back to it. I've tried to switch to the Note 8. I switched to the Note 8 for like 3 days.
Mhm.
That's how long I lasted. I have recently been checking out the G7, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the software just
Yeah,
is
at the end of the day.
it's just barely annoying enough that I go back to Google's Android.
I'm
Um,
curious though. Like again, Samsung is the big winner. Like they have dominance for a reason, and there's like millions of people using that software skin. Like it
yeah,
would be so interesting to compare, like to have those users, just like those regular users, give them a Pixel and see what they think about Android. Like maybe features wise, they might prefer Samsung, but like in terms of raw appearance, I'd be very curious to see which they prefer.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I know on a hardware on the hardware side of things, I think if you gave people an iPhone 8 and a Note 8 and said which one do you like better, just purely aesthetically, I think 9 out of 10 people would pick the Note 8.
Hmm.
I, I think I think it's pretty not debated that Samsung has got some of the best like industrial hardware design.
Yeah,
Um,
and
but
quality, mind you.
although I have to say, despite that, this whole edged screen thing needs to not be a thing. Like
Really? You know?
I am not a fan of it at all. I used the S7 back in S7 days. So I used the S7 for like 6 months, which is like the longest I've really stuck with a Samsung phone.
Uh,
Um, and that was the first phone with that, like, was it the first, or did S6 have the edge? Oh, S6 had the edge.
S6 might have the
Yeah.
edge. Yeah.
So it was the second one with the edge. And I can't remember, but either the S6 or the S7, one of them was more a dramatic edge. Like one of the edges was more dramatic. I think the S6 was more dramatic and the S7 toned it down a little bit.
Hmm.
Whatever the case may be, I was so like, either it's a software thing and Samsung's just not good at like accidental tap detection,
Hmm.
but I the entire time I used that phone, I was just frustrated all the time with accidental taps on the edge screen.
That's not good for
And
anybody.
yeah, and it looks good. Like
Yeah,
I completely will give you that, like
the
in
Pixel 2
ads,
XL.
in ads and even in real life, like if I'm holding a phone in a phone store, an AT&T store or whatever, like the edge thing is like a sexy thing, but
Mhm.
functionally I'm not a fan. And I appreciate Google for, I wonder, was that an intentional thing? Did the Pixel 2 XL not have an edge display because they felt the same way? If they did, that's a win for me.
But
I
you're fine
appreciate
with the
that.
curvature on the Pixel 2 XL, right? Like it's not
Oh
too
yeah,
much.
yeah,
It's like
because
this.
the display doesn't wrap around the edge.
Hmm,
Like
just a very
the
minor effect.
glass bezel is kind of wraps, but the display, the touchable parts of the display don't really wrap around the edge.
Hmm.
I mean, basically, it comes down to I appreciate the larger side bezels on the Pixel 2 XL.
Oh,
So
on the pic. Yeah. Okay. So,
I
yeah.
mean, a lot of people talked about that when the reviews were first coming out, that the Pixel 2 XL had these ugly side bezels and whatever. I like them.
Hmm.
And they do. I mean, they do look less attractive than the S9 Edge or whatever. um, so, anyways, next up, I think we could talk a little bit about. So, have you been using the Android P beta? We talked a little bit
Yes, I
about,
have. So yeah,
and is it? Have you been using it every day? You're good with it?
yeah, I switched to a full after after I/O, I switched on my daily driver Pixel 2. And yeah, again, like it continues in again with last year, I found it super with the first release, I already found it quite stable, but like stuff like Google Pay didn't work. But now it's yeah, I'm ready for this to be my daily driving mission critical operating system. And I've so IO was 2 weeks ago, and honestly, I've it's already hard to switch back to the previous gesture navigation. Okay, one like swiping up. That's like I find myself doing that on my older Pixel, and it's quite annoying. But two, I think the bigger change is to the recents menu, in that it's like the swiping the feeling of swiping up cards. It's so minor, but it feels nice compared to like sliding and the list of recent apps is vertical. So it's like these small changes that help make it feel modern because for the nature it's new. But I think that it's 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 modern, and like I've fully moved over to this modern feel, modern look.
Yeah, I mean, but like from a stability standpoint, you're completely like, have you had any like
None
stability
whatsoever.
problems at all?
Nope. I know
Yeah, I mean,
other team members have had one or two issues, but for me it's totally fine.
yeah, I someone on our team said that they had like they almost bricked their phone or something from
Yeah,
it. So
so that they had to reset.
yeah, I haven't had any problems either. I mean, generally speaking, I mean, I've been running it for 2 weeks, and it's I the only thing is I turned off gesture nav because
Oh yes, yeah.
I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of the mixed metaphors, the tapping. Like it took me. I ran it for like a week, and
Yeah,
after a
you
week,
give it
I
a fair
decided
shot.
I gave it a week to see if I could get used to the mixed metaphor of tapping and swiping, and that mixed with the fact that it just feels kind of half done right now, just
Yeah.
I decided to turn it off for now. However, I will throw this in for our lovely dedicated Alphabet Scoop listeners slash watchers. We got a tip from an anonymous tipster, like right around the time, like give or take IO time, when everyone was complaining about how like botched this navigation system is. Who said that surprisingly, so like my take initially was that these gestures were like pretty set in stone, that this was like not, I mean, they might iron a few things out, they might make some minor changes, but my take was that by the time Android P stable launches, that it was probably not going to be that different.
Hmm.
But our tipster said that the gestures are actually still, as of the IO release, like pretty heavy work in progress.
Hmm.
And that could mean that it could mean that there's a heavy they are a heavy work in progress in the long term. So like they might still not change that much for the full release. But Google might be looking at this with a longer perspective, and in that longer view, they might still very well be like not that finished.
Mm.
Um, but this person said that there's a few things that they're testing. So here's your bullet list. These are different changes to the navigation system, which it needs changes, believe me. That Google's testing. So one of them is a short center swipe for home. Um, so I take that to mean I don't even know how do you interpret that? What do you
So
think?
okay, because my big issue with using the gestures full time is that on the home screen, it's sometimes I just want to view the. I don't want to bring up the app switcher every single time, but sometimes like those two things because they both swipe ups, they confuse. So I think
Right.
from so I think the gesture you just mentioned was to like make sure that doesn't happen to get rid of that annoyance.
Right. Right. And then there's the other one they said they're testing like a long center swipe for the multitasking view. So like right now the multitasking view is like short, so like you barely flick it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it pops up multitasking. He said that they're testing, or this person, I don't know if it's a he. They said that they're testing, that Google's testing a long center swipe for multitasking view. So it would, you'd have to drag farther to bring up multitasking, and maybe I don't know. Would that swap them? Would somehow the navigation be short and the long be multitasking? I don't know. This is all just like obviously just an anonymous tip, so we don't really know. Another thing they're testing apparently internally is trying to do a very long, like almost all the way across the screen center swipe to open the app drawer. So like that's
Mm,
one complaint that people have had, is that it's too
yeah,
hard. It's too hard to open up the app drawer. Apparently, they're testing making it even harder. So
yeah.
like, that's crazy to me.
Because like again, the good part with these gestures is that they work for smaller phone. I mean, they work for bigger phones, and if Google's like making it like to the center of the screen, that defeats the purpose for
Yeah.
these big phones.
Um, and then another one was swiping up on the left or right side of the screen, from off the screen. So swiping up from off the screen on the left or the right side to bring up the last used app.
That's like a
Um,
power feature, I think. I don't know how easily exposed that would be to regular users, but I think
right.
I'd appreciate that.
And then the final thing is this person says that the version in the preview, so developer preview 2, lacks universal gestures, and that the internal build has a universal gesture system which works in apps and on the home screen,
Yeah,
which apparently should be active in the next preview. What do you think he means by or they? What do you think
universal.
they mean by the universal gesture system?
Maybe it's like bringing up the app launcher, the list of apps. So like that's even easier to access it. That was my only idea when I heard that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but we'll just leave that to Stu. And if anyone has any thoughts on it, feel free to leave a
Mhm.
comment over on 9to5google.com in the Alphabet Scoop post. But yeah,
These
that's
are
that.
upcoming ideas that
Um,
might happen. So,
yeah, maybe we can try and decipher this a little bit together. What's up?
but at the end of the day, any change is good for people like you who really change and polish is what really needs to happen by
Yeah,
DP3.
yeah, I agree. I ideally I would like to just see them copy and paste what Apple did. I mean, that's how I feel.
No, no,
Um,
I've used an iPhone. Like whenever I use an iPhone 10, the fact that I can't tap the bar to go home is drives me mad.
oh, I'm
I
sure if you've been tapping for 10 years, then of
yeah,
course.
never go away, please.
Um, Another thing that happened this week, kind of moving off the topic of Pixel, yesterday, and this was kind of a bombshell. Our old friend and ex-colleague Mark Gurman and another guy at Bloomberg dropped a report that Essential is canceling their second phone. So apparently, Essential had been working on a second phone, which I don't know if that was even confirmed until yesterday, like 100% confirmed. It was assumed, but apparently, if that was a thing, it's no longer a thing. And then apparently they're considering selling the company or parts of the company or something.
Well, that's yeah,
So
the essential brand because so the as you might know, a playground is Andy Rubin, the father of Android's larger incubator, which owns a lot of companies. It's essential, like being the flagship. But if that's being sold, ooh, or if the phone business is being sold, that's going to be a bit harsh.
yeah,
So,
I didn't. Sorry, go ahead.
essential, like, yeah, I was just going to talk about like the. Have you used the essential phone extensively?
I've not. I've used it a few times just
Hmm.
hanging out. I have some friends that have it. I've actually never. I've never Like I don't have one, and I've never tested it. But I've used it in passing. Have you?
Yeah. Yeah, same. In passing, I think at the end of the day, it's like a stock Android phone without any of Google's additions. But the hardware was nice. It was really. It
Oh
still
yeah,
is very. It's iconic. It's a monolith.
absolutely. Yeah, I
And
agree. I love the ceramic.
yeah, yeah, ceramic. And it's a shame that we're not going to see an iterated version on that.
Yeah, I agree. I hope that we will see an iterated version of it in the form of the Pixel 3.
But yeah, until then, the rumors that the focus was on the smart home stuff. Ambient OS, if you remember that, like when they announced the central phone, the other thing they announced was this very grandiose ambition for OS for everything else, for your smart home, for your appliances. And honestly, that's like it makes sense, doesn't it, to focus on the smart home because something like phones are so entrenched with like Samsung and Google. Like Google was able to get in because they Google and they have like they their brand recognition, they've got the hardware, they have the resources to
They have the
push
AI
and
chops too.
yeah, that's very important. Which essentially the feel from like Ambient OS is that they try to do similar things, and so far, like there was nowhere on the central phone, which is a bit sad.
Yeah, it wasn't so they had like a little it was kind of like an Echo Dot, right? Like a smart home device that they announced way like back when they announced the Essential phone
Yep, the
and
central home, I think.
Essential Home and it never even like it never got past the announcement.
Yeah, like during one essential event, I saw like this the it's so like the central home is a bit impressive because it's a 5-inch completely round display. Like hardware point, that's impressive. But that was the only component I've ever seen about the central home. Is like the single display and like nothing else. So that was not a good sign in
Yeah,
retrospect.
absolutely not. Yeah, so moving on, we also had some news this week in the Wear OS department, specifically surrounding which well, I have to say that's pretty notable by itself that we're talking about Wear OS because it's struggling that much. We actually haven't talked about Wear OS that much on the podcast. But this week rumors surfaced from Chinese social media site Weibo. They got picked up by Sam Mobile, I think. Sam Mobile said that this Weibo source, which we never even found the original source, we weren't able to find a link to it. But Sam Mobile said that this original source was supposedly reliable, and they said that Samsung is considering switching to Wear OS for the Samsung Gear S4 smartwatch
Mhm.
after a few years of using
Tizen.
Tizen. But this all it would be an interesting return because Samsung actually did launch the Samsung Gear Live
Yep.
as kind of one of its first real smartwatches, which
Yeah.
ran Android Wear. It was one of the very first Android Wear smartwatches. So
Mhm.
Samsung was clearly a Google partner from the beginning with Wear OS, but decided to go their own way for a few years, and now it looks like they might be coming back, right?
Yeah. So what Samsung brings, I think the primary thing they bring is hardware because the gear line is like it is a solid watch. They deserve a lot of credit for the hardware ideas they're pushing. So there's a rotating bezel. Tizen is power efficient enough that you get like 3 days. I think is like an average on a Gear S3 versus like the day you get with Wear OS currently. Still, they bring this hardware design chops, which there is some on Wear OS, but it's mostly committed to fashion brands, and it's like there's really no iteration. Honestly, it's just like different cases and stuff, which some people might like.
Yeah. Yeah, the big thing I think besides, I mean, obviously the Gear watches are nice in general, but I love the dial, the rotating
Mhm.
control system. Like, um, it's like the most satisfying thing to use. If you haven't used a Gear S2, S3, you need to try it out because it almost feels like this is the way smartwatches are supposed to be, honestly. When you turn that dial and use that to control the smartwatch, it just makes so much more sense than tapping,
Yeah,
and I'm a huge fan.
it makes more sense in the Apple's digital crown because like
Absolutely.
something so small when you can have like the entire face to work with. It's
Yeah.
again, good job, Samsung.
Yeah, and Samsung's done a good job of keeping it small too. It's not like they have to have this huge body to do that. Like the
Mm.
Gear S2 Classic is my favorite example. It's like easily my second favorite smartwatch because it's a really small, compact, nice size, lightweight, and yet it has that rotating dial, and it's like so nice. I'm just curious to see. So like following this report from this sketchy Chinese social media site, not that the whole social media site is sketchy, but that this specific rumor was sketchy. Um, Evan Blast, which we know has one of the better track records in the industry, is probably an understatement. He said that he basically just tweeted. He didn't really confirm anything or like make any serious claims, but he said that he saw Samsung employees wearing a Gear smartwatch, assumably a Gear smartwatch running Wear OS. So that put a little bit of fire on the flame, I guess, and showed that maybe the rumor did have some weight. And then I thought something that was really funny was that someone on Reddit right after this suggested that maybe this watch that Evan had seen
Is
was
it?
actually the Pixel watch that's supposedly launching later this year.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. Um, One, there is no way Samsung would not want to brand that device to high heaven. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And two,
Um, Sorry, go ahead.
like I think Google, they want the design to show. They have ideas and they want it to be
Right.
their own thing. They want to own it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Google's hardware department is taking hardware seriously. And I mean, the whole deal with so like the Pixel 2 and Pixel 2 XL, for those that aren't aware, were manufactured by LG and
HTC.
HTC, right? And the whole like so originally apparently Huawei was going to make both of them, but that kind of fell out because or what? No, the original Pixels. Yeah, the
Well,
original Pixels. It was the original Pixels. I'm 100% sure. The original Pixels, Huawei was going to make the original Pixels. And Huawei wanted to slap their brand on it, basically. Like, that was what it came down to. Like, Huawei was like, yeah, sure, we'll make the Pixels if you want to. But they wanted to do it like the Nexus phones, where Huawei got to have their little stamp on the back. And Google was like, no, they make this our own. And so they contracted it out to HTC, and HTC was fine with just contract manufacturing them. Obviously. And then obviously we know what happened with that, which with Google acquiring all of HTC's smartphone business. But yeah, I mean, I think that shows you, if Samsung on the off chance is manufacturing or making the Pixel watch or whatever it's going to be called,
Mhm.
it would definitely have to be
Not a
just some,
Pixel.
right. It would have to be not a Pixel, or if it is a
Made
Pixel, it would
made
have
with
to
our
be
friends at Samsung.
right, made with our friends at Samsung. Exactly. Um, that's an interesting brand that has not really.
No, it's gone. It's gone.
It's kind of gone. I mean,
Yeah.
but then there's the whole Xiaomi thing that we talked about a few episodes back,
Yeah.
which was like, and that's interesting to me. I mean, this is kind of side note, but so we got a tip that Xiaomi is working with Google to launch a smartphone in the U.S.
Yeah, in the US, the key
In the
part.
U.S. is the key, and which is interesting because our tips are noted that it was not an Android One phone. It wasn't an
Android
Android Go
Go.
phone either. So it's something else. And so I don't know. There was a report just today. I forgot where I read it, but it was Bloomberg or something, that Xiaomi's strategy, or I can't remember. Someone did an interview with one of the Xiaomi guys at I/O, and they said basically Xiaomi's strategy to enter the U.S. is to do not what every other Chinese manufacturer is doing, which every Chinese manufacturer has basically tried to sell direct to consumer, right, at cheap prices, and then maybe get into the carriers. And in the case of Huawei and OnePlus, they're not getting into the carriers. Oh, and ZTE too. I mean, ZTE is in some carriers, or well, we know what happened with ZTE recently, right?
Mhm.
Long story short, they have not been very successful, entering the U.S. market because getting in the carriers was kind of like an afterthought. It seems like,
Mhm.
um, and so apparently one of the Xiaomi executives at I/O told this publication, honestly, sorry, I can't remember which one it was, that Xiaomi's strategy is to focus on the carriers. The carriers is what all they care about. They have to figure out how to get in the carriers
Mhm.
and um and have their phones in stores sitting right next to the Pixel and the iPhone and the Galaxies.
Mhm.
Um and so that's just interesting to me. And they also said that this is part of why it's taken so long because they don't want to enter the US without doing it right, I guess, basically.
Yeah. Fair.
And so it'll be interesting to see how that comes through, or how are they going to have the like clout, I guess, or like the influence and the negotiating power with the carriers to get themselves into these stores. And
Mhm.
if you put that comment from this exec at IO with our, tip that Xiaomi's working with Google in some capacity to launch in the US, maybe it is one of these, and this kind of ties back to this whole like made with our friends at Google thing. Maybe it is one of those kind of relationships where it's not a Google product. It's clearly not like the LG Watch Style and the LG Watch Sport. Those were LG products, but Google kind of put their little stamp of approval on it, basically.
Well,
And so,
stamp of approval is generous. Okay, so one example: the Android P developer preview came out on the Huawei Watch 2, not the LG Watch Style, not the LG Watch Sport. Honestly, I'd be pretty upset if I bought either of those two devices and it's not like the flagship premier thing anymore. So,
yeah, yeah, we talked about this a few weeks ago. I think just saying
yeah,
that it might make sense that they did that because the Huawei Watch 2 is probably one of the best-selling Android Wear watches at the time, and
guess that's fair.
more dev devices. I just don't think the LG watches sold as well as they wanted them to.
And they're not that good, honestly, either.
Yeah, and they're not that good.
But
So
yeah, so Wear OS in 2018. So what can we expect in the future? We know Android P is coming, and like the main thing, but to take away from Android P is that it's more efficient on battery, which works with another rumor that Qualcomm is readying their third generation of chipsets, which should be more power efficient, which should finally help create devices that last longer than a day, which is again the case now, and like the thing that I'm most running up against the wall with. So for the past 2 weeks, okay, so beforehand I wore an Apple Watch in this insane, very insane setup where it was on Wi-Fi because I didn't wear an iPhone because I didn't carry an iPhone with me. So, but for the past 2 weeks, I've switched to wearing Wear OS full time, and it's fine. That's all. That's like the most high critique I can find. That at the end of the day, it's an accessory. It's an accessory to the phone. It's not a standalone thing, even though like the thing with Wear OS with Android Wear 2.0 that Google made a big push with was that LTE connectivity. It is no way the Wear OS as it is today is in no vicinity near the Apple Watch 3 LTE Series 3 LTE. So let's get that out of the way. Um, the chorus is fine. Apps aren't really a thing. I found and the impression I'm getting from most people is that you stay on the watch face, you use complications, you don't really go deeper into apps. That's so it's just like a very surface level OS, and the primary use is notifications. And notifications are fine. There's nothing exceptional about it. I don't think there's much innovation in how you handle notifications. One, like from the hardware standpoint, one differentiating factor from the Apple Watch, like on phones, is that there's an always-on display. It's a great battery weight. It consumes battery, but honestly, I find it useful. And again, like the hardware, as we said at the top, it's thick by nature of like the Qualcomm's chipset being super old at this point, 2 years old. And the best you're getting is day-long battery life with that mode enabled. So if Google is really making a big push with the Pixel Watch, there needs to be better hardware, better core hardware that powers it all. And two, I think they need the Wear OS needs to be more exceptional. It needs to be a better competitor to Watch OS. I don't know how you can do that in the constraints of Android, but there needs to be improvement. And like we speculated with the Samsung jumping onto Wear OS, is that there has to be a reason that Google is able to convince Samsung. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that last point that if let's just, for a thought experiment, let's assume that Samsung is launching the Gear S4 with Wear OS and kind of, I mean, they've been doing a lot of work on Tizen for the last few years. They'd be leaving a lot of stuff behind. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but obviously, as Ben laid out in a post this week on our site, comparing like the pros and cons of moving, um, they obviously have a lot to gain as well by
Yes.
switching over. But like you said, I don't know if they would have been able to. I don't know if Google. It's a weird dynamic. Is it Samsung who feels like Tizen's not going anywhere and that they're not going to be able to? They need a better platform, and so they're going to Google and saying like, well, not can we use Wear OS because they can, but like I wonder, did Google really go to Samsung and be like, please launch Wear OS on your next watch or something? Like I don't know how that relationship looks right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that if Samsung is going to use Wear OS on its watch, one, for Google's benefit, because more watches that are running Wear OS, better it is for Google, or for
Mhm.
Samsung's benefit, like regardless of who's benefiting, Wear OS needs to be better before Samsung can do it, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and I think honestly, one of the main things that needs to be better to compete with the Apple Watch, which the Apple Watch is a whole other story. I feel
Mhm.
like the reason the Apple Watch is so successful is because it's an accessory to the best selling phone or one of the best, like to the iPhone. Um, Not as much on its own merit, I think. Uh, but
Hmm.
it does have, it's kind of like it's kind of a positive feedback loop. It is good because it's so successful, and it's so successful because it's good and
It
because
works with the iPhone.
it works with the iPhone. So I'm not saying the Apple Watch is bad, but I feel like if Samsung's going to do Wear OS on the Gear S4, they do need to, you know, do some things that Apple's doing. I think the biggest thing that Apple's doing really, really well is fitness.
Mm-hmm.
The entire fitness aspect of the Apple Watch is just so
Oh
much better.
boy.
Like
I
I
have.
think I think it not only is Apple doing it better, I think that Apple has realized that it's one of the primary reasons people buy
Yes.
smartwatches.
Yes,
Um,
definitely.
it's like people go to the store and they are looking for a fitness device and they think, oh, I'll get the Apple Watch. It works with my iPhone. It's made by Apple. It looks good. It's really comfortable and
It's
it has all the fitness
customizable.
features. It's customizable. And on top of that, it does all of the smartphone notifications or
Mm-hmm.
whatever other stuff. Like that's just the stuff, that like that's like the extra. But the fitness stuff is really
Yeah.
what people want.
Uh,
And Apple has nailed it with the fitness
oh,
stuff.
they have.
Like,
It's thoughtful, which is a lot of things that Apple do. And to me, Google Fit, it still exists, guys. Google Fit is the most bare bones thing in the world. It's a pedometer, honestly.
it's a pedometer. That's such an
I,
insult, but it's true.
okay, so to be super cynical, and I don't think this is the case. Google Fit exists because one of the tentpole features that Google wants to push with Wear OS is the fitness thing. Like they want it to be like a basic step counter, and to do that, they need a basic service that does it. It's nothing more than it's so basic. Like I can't the features wise are so lacking. I can't. It just keeps track of your counts, and that's it. There's distance, there's goals, there's calories. It's nowhere. There's no assistive features whatsoever. And like when we were talking about Nokia, like Google possibly Nest possibly buying Nokia a few weeks back, what I my main wish from that was that Google gets serious about health. They get serious about data. Like they have so much AI smarts that they should be doing something with this data, and they are not. And
Yeah.
like Google Fit, like if something's happening this fall, we need a big revamp with Google Fit because they launched and made a big new push for Wear OS, and these were the fitness features they had. That's immediately like a reason why not to get it if
Yeah.
you're in any way
The
serious.
to I think to summarize why the Apple Watch nails it so well is so like there's two kinds of fitness people. One is people, the majority I would assume are just people who want something that is going to tell them whether or not they're just sitting down all day, and they
Mm-hmm.
want something that will help them just generally be kind of sort of active in their life.
Yeah.
And like because that's the bare minimum. Like these are people who are sitting in a cubicle for 9 hours a day, and they want something that will help them like live a healthier lifestyle just generally,
Mm-hmm.
by tracking your movement, tracking how often you're standing up, doing I like the whole breathing thing on the Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
And the other category of fitness users, I think Zach Hall at 9 to 5 Mac is more in this category, where they're really into some specific kind of sport or something, and they want a fitness thing to help track them with that. So like cycling, for instance, there's workouts for cycling, or swimming or whatever. And I think the big win is that Apple figured out what the first category of people, the majority of people, I think, like they
They made a
condensed.
device for both categories.
Well, yeah, they did both, for instance, for one. But in that first category, which is I think the majority, they condensed what people want into three things, and that's moving, exercise, and standing
Mm-hmm.
up. And
Mm-hmm.
they made this ring system out of it. They figured that out. And I think that has been like it's already kind of a cultural thing, like
Yeah.
closing your rings. Like people, it's like they managed to condense into these three categories, and these three categories do a pretty half decent job of summarizing what it means to just not sit on your butt all day. Moving generally, getting some amount of exercise every day, and standing up once an hour. That's the three things that people want to do just to stay in the most general form of the sense of the word, just fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Apple Watch is the only fitness product, um, with the exception of maybe some Fitbit stuff, maybe
Yeah.
Garmin, forgot what they're called. Garmin. It's not the only one that's done it, but Apple's done it, I think, the best, in terms of meeting functionality with form and making it something that's like easily shareable and social too, like
Yeah.
sharing your rings with people. And oh man, it's just like I think that they really nailed it
Yeah.
with catering to that first category. And I mean, Google's offerings just aren't like, they just like barely exist in comparison.
Like they nail. Yeah. That is everything to say about Google Fit, honestly.
Yeah. So hopefully, long story short, let's hope that if Google's launching their own watch later this year and they're going to relaunch Wear OS, that they don't embarrass themselves by relaunching it again. I mean, I feel like they've relaunched, so they that Android Wear and then the Android Wear 2.0, which was like a big like no, we're relaunching LG Watch Style, LG Watch Sport. And we're gonna take it seriously this time. And now they did the Wear OS rebrand, and they didn't really launch any new features with that. So they've done all these pushes, but nothing substantial. And
Yeah,
so
that's like at the
I'm
end of the day, nothing
yeah,
substantial.
right. Next up, so finally, one thing I just want to talk about because it was hitting like all the like it was a story we published. Was it yesterday? I think last night. Ads are starting to pop up in Google Feed. I wanted to talk about this because I think it's it might just seem silly or small, but I think it's like actually indicative of something bigger. So apparently Google is testing showing for the first time. So like we all know that the story with Google Feed is that it was Google Now for a long time, and
Rest in
we talked
peace.
about that. We talked about it last week. Yeah, rest in peace, Google Now. We talked about the last week how it's slowly become more over time become Google Feed, which is basically a news feed of just articles. And for the first time yesterday, users are starting to see ads in Google Feed. Have you seen any yourself yet?
No, fortunately.
Yeah, neither have I. I haven't either, but people are, and the reason I want to talk about it is because as a whole, Google's in the business of making money, right?
Yes.
And so it's just like I feel like this is one of those things that's kind of like you remember the Beauty and the Beast ad that popped up on Google Home like a year
Yeah.
or two ago? It's kind of one of those things where it's like, is the stuff Google's putting out, hardware and software, is it too good to be true?
Mm,
Like I mean, I'm not saying that in a year or two, the Google Home is just going to be covered with ads, because it won't, because they'll scare off too many people, and people hate ads. But I mean, the Google Home Mini, for instance, like Google is giving these away like
yeah.
freebies basically like we've posted deals of free Google Home Minis like once a week on 9 to 5 Toys, it feels like, or
Mm,
we've seen some kind of deal where you can get a Google Home Mini free for some kind of promotion. Google has really, really good software that they're shipping on the Pixel phone. I feel like it's kind of an insult. Like, is it not an insult to ship a phone for 850 and have ads on the home screen?
but,
Like, I complain about that. I complain about that all the time with like other OEMs who are selling cheap phones
okay.
who have like is that do you not find that kind of insulting to you?
Yes and no. From like as yeah, well, if I were a consumer, I would be, but like at the same side, like the thing with the internet is like nobody pays for anything on the internet, and we're getting like so many features, like so many, like Google Photos alone justifies that, but many people have forgotten like uh, what would life be without Google search, without a good search engine, or Google Maps without Google Maps. So like again, the way I see it is that we are going to start seeing these ads more and more as like, and people are going to start thinking about how like they do get benefits. They do get benefits that they've long thought are free. And on balance, I think you have to accept the ads, like simply as that, unless there's like a new paid tier for like how the internet works.
Okay, well, here's this perspective. So I talked about on the top of the show for half an hour about how Google's the only company that's really taking on Apple
Yeah.
on the Android side of things, or at least going for that market. Can you imagine the backlash if the article had been written on 9 to 5 Mac yesterday that Apple was putting ads or put an ad in the widgets screen of the iPhone 10 or something? Um, I feel like those followers and those consumers would like lose their minds. Like if like so like my wife's just like an average iPhone user. She's using an
Mm.
iPhone 7. She's an iPhone 6 before that, iPhone 5 before that. If she
Yeah.
had seen an ad on her iPhone, like she would hate that probably.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's like I can kind of understand putting ads on a phone's home screen or selling like pre-installed bloatware, if you're selling your phone for 200 bucks and you're aiming at the budget most budget end of the market. But
Hmm.
the Google Pixel is like,
Okay.
like,
I guess like my argument is that you can't view a Google phone in isolation of its services. Like a Google phone, an Android phone is meant to showcase Google services, and you're getting those for free as is. Like again, like the iPhone is an explicit transaction, but like with services that are used repeatedly, that are used daily, and that have so much value, I don't think you can make that separation as easily.
yeah, I understand that. I just feel like if if I'm paying $850 for a phone, I don't want
Mhm.
to have ads, period.
Yeah,
It's kind of not that, it's not that far off from like the whole Amazon Prime phone thing,
yeah,
where they're putting ads on the lock screen and you pay like half the price to do the ads. I, I just don't understand. Like, I'm hoping that, I mean, I don't think this was, so this was like a test. It was
yeah. It's a
obviously like,
test.
it was labeled as an ad, and it's obviously not gonna, I don't think that Google's like imminently gonna roll this out like
They've
widely.
seen the backlash. They've seen it enough. That I
But
think this is good.
my thing is that if they launch this tomorrow on the Pixel launcher and Google Feed,
Hmm.
I would find some way to avoid it. I mean, I,
Oh, fair.
I and so I just want to express my very strong opposition to Google putting ads in the Google Feed. So
Okay.
if anyone cares, which a lot of people don't care, but I feel pretty strongly that if Google wants to be taken seriously in the hardware game,
Okay.
that they need to not put ads on their phones by default.
Okay. Let's flip the argument. You paid 850 for a phone. You paid $50 for a whole mini. What is the same discussion going to occur when ads start coming to Google Assistant?
I
Like
mean,
because it's so cheap, did you accept that trade off?
preferably I would, that cheap option wouldn't exist. If it
Uh-huh.
means, if it means I'm going to end up with ads being
Yeah.
read to me aloud in my home,
Hmm.
I would, I would prefer,
The
yeah,
premium
I would prefer the Google Home to cost
more.
more and just have the assumption and the guarantee that that's not going to happen in the long run,
Hmm.
than Google give them away with the long term plan of being like, we're going to monetize this eventually.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just my take,
Yeah,
and I'm
definitely.
so
Like
yeah.
hopefully like the services is enough to monetize Google Home.
I mean,
The
I want the
devices.
hardware to be enough. I mean, it's not, because they're not selling that many devices yet. I mean, we did right this week that Google's finally beating Amazon in
Yeah.
Google Home
But
sales.
Amazon is the exact same model.
But I think that the reason that is that, so Google's up like almost 500% year over year.
Hmm.
I feel like a huge portion of that is the fact that they're giving out and
Yeah,
selling
oh,
Google Home
definitely.
Minis
Oh,
for
definitely.
$50. So like if Google Home Minis are counting that number, which they are,
Yes.
uh that's a huge percentage of it. Like these are
Yeah.
$50. You can buy 10 of them and give them to your family for Christmas, like,
Hmm.
um and so it seems like the model Google's taking with those is, let's get as many of them out there as possible. Eventually we'll figure out the monetization aspect.
Hmm.
Um, I would rather them sell the Google Home Mini for $100 and the regular Google Home for 250 and the Google Home Max for 500, if it means it means the profit margins are high enough that I don't ever have to worry about whether or not I'm going to be advertised to down the line.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. That's just how
And
I
like I
feel.
think this discussion is going to like this is a topic that we're going to discuss much more in the future as like
For sure.
more
For
ways
sure.
to monetize. So in the
Yeah.
future.
Speaking of in the future, we can, I guess, close things out and talk about. So, like you said, next week is the Augmented World Expo or something.
Yeah.
Very small chance, but maybe Google will have some kind of presence there. We've been seeing some like chatter that
Headset.
Copen is one of the companies that makes manufacturers parts for Glass Enterprise Edition. They're apparently going to have a very strong presence there, as well as plenty of other augmented reality, makers, manufacturers, and companies. Everyone's going to be there. So there's an off chance that we might hear something about some kind of Glass or AR Google related thing. We don't know.
Most like the enterprise.
Yeah, if there is, it would be probably on the enterprise side of things. But yeah, this has been a long show. We've covered a lot, and we really appreciate you tuning in. You can tune in every week here on Alphabet Scoop. We record this podcast every Friday, publish every Saturday morning. We're tended to do like a live show on Fridays now, publish on all your podcast platforms on Saturday mornings. And those platforms include iTunes and Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Google App Podcasts, Google Play, all of the above. You can listen on our site, 9to5google.com as well, if you want to listen to the MP3 audio file. And you can also find links to the RSS feed for the podcast there as well, if you'd like. So this has been a great show. We hope you've enjoyed it. And thanks for tuning in. And thanks for joining me again, Abner.
See you next week.